You're watching live picture right now from Las Vegas, Nevada, where President Trump and First Lady Melania Trump have arrived to greet some of the first responders, local officials, and we believe victims' families as well. This, of course, the president's first trip to the city since Sunday night's mass casualty shooting. The death toll from that shooting now up to 59 confirmed deaths, nearly 530 injured. President Trump has arrived there now, traveling with him House Majority Leader Kevin McCarthy, Senator Dean Heller from Nevada, and greeting him on the tarmac, local officials there, of course, the mayor of Las Vegas, Carolyn Goodman, the governor of Nevada, Brian Sandoval, and Sheriff Joseph Lombardo of the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department, who President Trump has been hailing as having done some fantastic work leading those team of first responders on the scene to Sunday night's deadly shooting. President and the First Lady there, just visible over the top of that car in which they're going to be traveling to go meet with some of those local officials. And this has been a trying 48 hours now for President Trump. Yesterday he was in Puerto Rico meeting with victims of the devastating Hurricane Maria there, the vast majority of whom are still without power. Today, continuing his role as consoler or comforter in chief, as many call him, meeting with some of the people from all over the country, many of whom are still here recovering, survivors of that shooting, which now goes down in history as the deadliest mass shooting in modern American history. As we watch now, President Trump and Melania Trump, First Lady, have made their way into the car to go meet with some of those first responders, local officials, and survivors of Sunday night's shooting. Joining me live in our coverage right now, my colleague Catherine Falders from down in Washington, D.C. joins us from the White House. She's been following the president over the last couple of days in particular. And Catherine, we didn't hear anything from the president there as he landed in Las Vegas. He's clearly focused on getting to those meetings and meeting with some of those people who've been so highly anticipating his arrival. We heard a little bit from him before he left the White House today, though. How did he frame today's visit, and what do we expect to see from him today?
We heard a little bit from him when he left the White House this morning. That's right, Amna. He said, this is a sad thing. This is a sad time. He's going to meet with those police, those first responders who he's praised over the past 2 days for their fast work. You see him leaving there right now on his way to these events that he has here today. We expect him, and he's heading there now to meet with the first responders, the police, to visit some of those recovering in the hospital. It's not on his official schedule right now that he will meet with victims, with families of the victims. We expect he may do something like that. But in terms of what we expect to hear from him today, a very solemn President Trump over the past 2 days when he's talked about this particular incident in Las Vegas. Yesterday, he said he did come out and speak about the shooter, calling him a sick and a demented person. Very harsh language from him over there. A little more solemn here this morning, and he mentioned that, for him personally, this is a very, very sad day. Amna.
Catherine, we talked a little bit about this yesterday, that in some ways this is a new role for President Trump, who came into office with a very forward-looking agenda, a very positive, sort of mission-driven agenda. These are the things that land on his lap. These are the things he is forced in this office to take on and adjust to. And this is the first time he's had to respond to a mass shooting. Unfortunately, we have to say it may not be the last time, given the pace at which these things happen. But what do we know about the conversations in the White House about how the president will speak and what his message will be to the people there in Las Vegas?
Yeah, his message will be one of those reassuring the nation, similar to what he said on Monday. Of course, that's what we expect him to reassure the nation, to console those in the hospital, to praise the first responders, the police, as he's been doing. But as you mentioned, this is a different role for him. He's in a role as comforter-in-chief. He's been put in this role, though different situations, when he had to go down, when he visited Texas because of the hurricanes, when he visited Florida. Just yesterday, Puerto Rico, the optics of that is, some would criticize as not so great, because he seemed to make it a little bit about him there and combat the, quote, as he says, fake news. But this is the same role for him as comforter-in-chief, but it really is the first time where he's had to be on the ground responding to a mass shooting like this. And it's something that happened far too often under Obama. President Obama gave 18 addresses to the nation during his presidency, something he became very frustrated with when we talk about gun control legislation. But this is the first one for President Trump. So the optics here are something that's going to be watched across the nation.
Of course, it's the first time President Trump has to address this. You mentioned President Obama. Presidents before him, Bush and Clinton, all had to face their own mass casualty shootings. Mary Alice Parks, our colleague over in the Washington, D.C. Bureau, has been following the angle of this that you raised, Catherine. Mary Alice, I want to ask you about the conversation this spurs every single time, which is to say, how do we stop these things from moving forward? What are we hearing from folks on the Hill so far?
Democrats are saying, just pleading with Republicans to come to the table and even debate gun safety measures. We've just been talking to some lawmakers today that walked out of the White House, had a press conference in walked out of the Capitol, had a press conference there on the Capitol steps and said, let's do anything. It could be big sweeping reforms or small measures. Democrats saying, please, let's look at any possible new regulations to make it harder for people to get guns, to make it harder for people to amass all these weapons. They're looking at some very specific technology that the Las Vegas shooter seems to have used. So that's sort of one side of the conversation. But the other side of the conversation, I have to say, sounds exactly the same as it does almost every time. A lot of Republicans just saying now is not the time for debate. Republicans saying they're not convinced that new policy regulations would have made a difference or could make a difference in preventing this kind of thing moving forward. So there's definitely a reigniting, a new moment for this debate, but it's unclear whether there will be any new rules, new laws, anything that changes.
And there's a lot to be had on that conversation as well. Still very much developing, of course, is still the investigation into this most recent shooting. And Catherine, I want to get your take on this because we have a little bit of breaking news we can share with our audience now. We've learned that the suspect's girlfriend, the Stephen Paddock suspected shooter in this case, had a girlfriend by the name of Mary Lou Danley. We understand that she is going to be questioned in the next half hour at the FBI's LA field office. We understand she had made her way back to the States. She was abroad in the Philippines when the shooting occurred. Catherine, it speaks to the ongoing nature of this investigation, the things we don't yet know. You mentioned earlier the president only recently weighed in on the shooter. He's been quick to jump into the mix and tweet about things or talk about things that have happened in the past. Why has he been so hesitant when it comes to this particular shooting?
It's interesting, and that news just coming in on the plane on Air Force One, but he has been hesitant with this one, except for yesterday when I asked him, how are you going to prevent? What are you going to do to prevent things like this from happening in the future? Thinking he may mention something about gun control laws, and you're right. He was quick to label the shooter as somebody who was sick, a demented person, possibly associating it with mental health there, and not so much the idea of discussing more legislation surrounding gun control. And this morning as well, when he was leaving, other than his message to the people of Las Vegas, he was asked a question, what is he learning about the shooter? What is he learning about the motives? And the president said, we continue to learn a lot more. They're learning a lot more. And I'm going to announce that at an appropriate time. So he has been, much more hesitant in this case to label him, as something or another, but he has jumped into the debate to call him a sick and demented person.
And Mary Alice, the question here for the folks who are in charge of legislating, of putting forth the policy that could change things moving forward, the question is really like, what is your plan? Whether it's gun control or some kind of holistic approach to mental health and background checks or whatever it is, who's coming forward with a plan right now?
Right, so you have some Democrats that are saying, let's take a small piece of gun safety, and specifically this new technology. I think we've had a lot of Americans over the last few days Googling these bump stock devices. I know that I did. I didn't know this was a thing before. We've been hearing a lot of the investigators there in Las Vegas talking about how the shooter was able to basically modify his semi-automatic assault rifle to make it almost like a machine gun. And people know that machine guns aren't allowed, and so why in the world is a device that could make a gun like a machine gun allowed? So you have some Democrats on the Senate, Dianne Feinstein, introducing new legislation saying, okay, let's at least close this weird loophole. If machine guns are outlawed, then the devices that could make a gun into something like a machine gun should be outlawed. And we've had some Republicans say that that's a really interesting, small, sort of could be more targeted piece of legislation that they maybe could get behind. They say that they're still looking at the evidence, talking to investigators. But I think that'll be something that's really interesting to watch in the next few days because it's a concrete idea, something that was directly related to this shooting, and maybe something that could be a small piece of gun control, a small piece of gun safety moving forward that lawmakers could tackle.
Mary Alice, I have to ask, though, in this climate, because Congress does not have a reputation for getting a lot of things done, being able to come together and compromise to work forward and actually pass legislation. But this kind of incremental step is exactly what a lot of people have been talking about for a very long time. When you look at the way in which we have reduced deaths related to, say, automobile safety, for example, it's been through incremental steps over the years, not one big sweeping change. Is there anything about Sunday night's events or the death toll as it now sits and could potentially rise that leads you to believe things could be different with this one piece of legislation moving forward?
It really depends who you ask. There are plenty of folks who were really disheartened that there wasn't any new legislation put in place after the Sandy Hook shooting. There are folks that say if that horrible instance couldn't bring lawmakers together to do anything to pass any kind of gun safety, then why would this be any different? But there are others that do seem to think that this could be a unique moment. I'm always sort of relating it back to the kind of the healthcare conversation and public polling with healthcare. When you asked people, do you like Obamacare? We used to talk about folks saying no. Generally, the polling on Obamacare was pretty bad. But then during the healthcare repeal debate, we noticed that as you broke apart the law, talked about pre-existing conditions or certain aspects of the law, suddenly a lot of people were willing to go into the streets and storm town halls and talk about the importance of specific parts of legislation. And I think that that's what you could see right now in this moment with gun control. You talk broadly about Second Amendment rights. Yeah, a lot of Americans really believe, of course, they have a constitutional right to guns, to bear arms, to make sure that that is a right and a right that people are proud of, and that makes this country really unique. But does the Second Amendment right mean all guns, all the time, anywhere, without any restrictions? I think you have more and more Americans that say, probably not, that doesn't make sense. And are there certain parts of gun safety that we can pass either on a state level or a federal level?
You know, Catherine, Mary Alice raises a really interesting point there, which is how the American public actually feels about these issues. And there's been consistent polling around this, right? When it comes to things like basic background checks, consistent background checks, the majority of Americans actually support those kinds of measures being taken when it comes to gun regulation. And I want to ask you this from the perspective of someone who covers the White House, because the president has proven himself to be somewhat responsive to public sentiment. We saw it with DACA. We saw when he responded and basically said, okay, we're going to take a softer stance on this when he found out it was a vastly unpopular step he was taking. Do you think that there's any room when it comes to this, especially for a man who ran his campaign as a Second Amendment protectionist? Is there any room for movement on this issue?
You know, I think, as you know, anything with this president, he responds off certain events that happen across the country, and does have a variety of different perspectives with him. I think there is a little bit of wiggle room here for him. He probably won't frame it as he was somebody who was a Second Amendment supporter on the campaign trail, but I think, at least from speaking to him when he's talked to us on the South Lawn leaving the White House, he's acknowledged that this gun control debate in legislation is something that we're going to be talking about very soon. Of course, the White House says, which was getting some criticism the other day, as Mary Alice noted, Sarah Sanders mentioned that now is not the time to be talking about this. It's a time to mourn. But the president, at least when we've seen him just out behind us, has been receptive to this issue about starting the conversation again, legislation behind it. So I think, as we've seen with other issues, I think there is some wiggle room here for him. He needs to be presented with all the facts. There's differing opinions inside this White House. So I do think there's some room for him there, and I think it's something we can see. I think this, as he mentioned, he says that this has affected him personally. So we'll see how he responds to that.
We will see, indeed. The president now on a trip to Las Vegas in the wake of Sunday night's historic shooting. Catherine Faulders and Mary Alice Parks, always good to talk to you guys. And of course, we'll have continuing coverage right here of the president's trip, or you can head over to abcnews.com to get updated on the latest on that story and many more. For now, I'm Amna Nawaz, and I'll see you back here soon.